Welcome to the Deep Dive,
Emerald City Hockey's Seattle Kraken podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Deep Dive Emerald City Hockey Seattle Kraken podcast. RJ, we have a very Firebirds heavy podcast after the game we were out there for last Friday. Exciting stuff to talk about there as the Firebirds just keep on rolling. They're just doing so good, up 2-0 over the Milwaukee Admirals in the Western Conference Final. It's good stuff.
Yeah, 8 playoff wins in a row for the Firebirds. They're on fire. I've tried not to say it, but there it is. I've said it. Sorry, everybody.
Didn't even make it 30 seconds in.
Yeah, I know. Everybody has turned off the podcast by now. We'll see you next week. But seriously, though, that was an awesome experience going to see the Firebirds on Friday, and fun having the road trip with you as well, getting to chat hockey and see that team again up close. We always enjoy those trips.
Yeah, we had a nice casual 7.5 hours total in the car together. Not bad for one day, yeah. I'd say. So yes, we're gonna break everything down Firebirds and obviously the experience of being there for the playoffs again and how much fun that is. Oh, it's so much fun. Gonna talk about some quick news and notes regarding the Kraken and one of the Kraken's big prospects, but of course got to start with thanking Queen Anne Beer Hall for sponsoring the podcast. And RJ, I just discovered something about the beer hall. Well, I guess you know because I just told you right before we started. But at the
tell everybody.
I know, at the Moss Bay Hall location, so that second location that opened up over last season, right? They have a brunch menu. They gotta tell me these things. I love brunch. Like, it's the best. So I'm like super pumped to see that they've got this brunch menu. They got like chicken and waffles, all sorts of good stuff. They got a breakfast smash burger. These guys will smash a burger any time of day. Anytime of day.
I know.
It's great.
They will.
So, I recommend if you're like me and you love breakfast food and brunch and all that kind of good stuff, I definitely recommend going to their Moss Bay Hall location and checking out their Friends with Benedict's menu, which is their brunch menu.
Oh man. I could go for an eggs Benedict right now. That is my favorite breakfast food. So sounds great.
Yeah, no, that does sound good. So I'm really pumped about that and pumped to have them sponsoring the podcast as always. Now, RJ, on to the news and notes. There are 2 whole news tidbits about the Kraken. It's crazy. We're in June. How is that even possible?
2 whole tidbits? Man, we're spoiled.
I know, we really are. Let's get started with them. Let's start with the one that would make sense for June because the draft is in June, and this first bit of news involves the draft.
That's right. So the Kraken's draft order is set now with the New York Rangers being eliminated. The Kraken were kind of waiting on them to be out so we'd know where that pick was, the pick that came back in the Alex Wenberg trade. And so with the Rangers out, not making the Cup final, that pick is number 63 overall. So quickly reading down the picks, the Kraken have pick number 8, 40, 63, 73, 88. That one's from Toronto. 105, 169, 201, and then 202. That one from Calgary. So those are the Kraken's picks in the upcoming draft that will be at Sphere in Las Vegas. So we'll be there. And those are the picks we're going to get to see them make, or unless they move one of those picks, move up, move down. Wouldn't surprise me if those aren't the exact picks that they make by the end of the draft.
I was going to say, you got 4 picks in the top 73. You could probably make something happen with that, right? Right? If you got picks
you could package
40, 63, 73, you could probably package those together on something if they want to make something happen. Otherwise, you can just continue to draft with, picks in that range. Kraken historically do pretty all right, I would say, drafting in that range. Lots of second round and third round picks for the Kraken as we've been watching them develop have started to look like they've got, real shots at maybe not joining the roster next year, but certainly the year after that. They're going to be a big factor for the Firebirds next season, which is going to be fun. So yeah, I mean, in Ron we trust for the draft. That's certainly been the case, I'd say.
Oh yeah, the organization's drafted well. And one thing I find exciting too about this draft order is that the Kraken have some real potential here to have 2 picks in a row for the first time in franchise history. I don't know if they'll keep those 201 and 202 in the 7th round, but that'd be cool to have 2 picks in a row.
Yeah, that would be.
Make them related to each other somehow.
Somehow.
That's what I want to see. Like draft teammates or draft. I don't know. Do something like that.
Yeah, gotta do something fun when you've got something like that.
In the seventh round.
It's the 7th round. Like, yeah, what else are you gonna do in the 7th round, really? So there's that aspect of things, and then the other bit of news that kind of comes out around the beginning of June is awards, RJ. And there is actual news related to the Kraken in terms of NHL awards voting.
That's right. So Oliver Bjorkstrand, he got some votes for the Lady Byng Trophy. So congratulations to him. He wasn't one of the finalists. I don't think we're going to have any Kraken Award finalists this year. But one thing that's cool is you do get to see kind of the voting breakdown for all of these awards. And so lots of players do end up getting votes for these awards. And I'm trying to see exactly his vote breakdown. There we go. So he finished 21st in voting for the Lady Byng Trophy. He received 1 third-place vote, 6 fourth-place votes, and 5 fifth-place votes. So the Lady Byng Trophy, by the way, is awarded to the player adjudged to have exhibited the best type of sportsmanship and gentlemanly conduct combined with a high standard of playing abilities. So for Kraken fans, I think they probably understand why Oliver Bjorkstrand got some votes there. Definitely a very gentlemanly player. Yep. And then also with that high standard of playing ability, no surprise.
Yeah, I mean, he had a fantastic season this year for the Kraken. I mean, putting up 59 points, no small feat kind of with this team, unfortunately. And then, yeah, the 12 penalty minutes. It's actually a lot of penalty minutes for somebody getting Lady Byng votes, I feel like. 12, double digits.
That's true. I mean, as a forward too, because usually forwards have fewer penalty minutes than defensemen on the voting and everything. But I'm trying to remember where those penalty minutes came exactly. I'm sure there's like some hooking calls or some, maybe not even slashing because that's too vicious for him. A trip or something like that. But a lot of times people will just look at the penalty minute stats.
Yeah, no, it's he's very, very deserving of the votes for this. I mean, it's just even like hearing you reread the description of the award, you just think of Oliver Bjorkstrand. Like, how do you just not, right? Like, it exactly. Just is. So, congrats to him on the votes there. Definitely deserved. And then for the last bit of news before we get into the Firebirds, RJ, and this one might go a little bit longer. I just mentioned a little bit ago, right? The Kraken's draft history and some of the players that they've taken there and how good they look and how they'll be joining the Firebirds next year. And certainly can't talk about anybody like that without bringing up Jagger Firkus right now, who's, Moose Jaw Warriors, went to the Memorial Cup. And then there was also like a big award for him too. Like we can kind of combine these last two topics all around Jagger Firkus. Why don't you let everybody know about that before I then bring up my thing about Jagger Firkus?
That's right. Yeah. Well, we'll start with this. So congratulations to Jagger Firkus on winning the CHL David Branch Player of the Year Award. So that's just the Player of the Year Award in the whole Canadian Hockey League. So it's the Western Hockey League, the Ontario Hockey League, and the Quebec Major Junior League. And so that is a big deal. I mean, that is all of Canadian junior hockey, and he was named Player of the Year. And I mean, looking at his stats, his production, I mean, it's no question why. He had 126 points in 63 games. Those are video game numbers, Dylan.
61 goals in those 63 games.
Yeah, so almost a goal per game player in juniors this year. And so, yeah, big part of leading the Moose Jaw Warriors to a spot in the Memorial Cup. And I think this award is no surprise to me. I think it's clearly Jagger Firkus this year.
Yeah, he had a phenomenal year, put up a ton of numbers. We know that, helped lead that team on a tremendous run as well. I mean, Moose Jaw had a heck of a year, and he was a big reason why they did. Yeah, I mean, it is very, very deserving. He's a phenomenal junior player. There's no questions about that. But
you said phenomenal junior player. I think I know where you're going with
junior
this.
Player. Those of you who are maybe members of the Patreon, have been around for the prospect chats and stuff, know that I've talked about aspects of his game that he's going to need to tweak and change as he, advances into the pro game and leaves junior behind next year as he's going to go and join the Firebirds and all that. And because he had won, CHL Player of the Year, different groups were taking a look at him, and one, Puck Preps is the name of this one, and they do CHL player cards where they kind of break down how these players have been doing in a bunch of different ways, analytically and all that kind of stuff. And they posted Jagger Firkus's for him winning Player of the Year. And I'll go ahead and I'll throw it up on the video version of the pod here. But RJ, I texted it over to you, this player card, and it looks phenomenal. Almost everything is great, right? Like there's lots of good stuff. The stuff that you think is not so good for him, it's like hits, 5th percentile or whatever. Like that's obviously, we know he's not like a big bruiser. He's not going to go out there and do a lot of stuff there. There's another single digit number on this chart though. That is part of what concerns me, and one of the things that I talk about, and that's undershooting, believe it or not, and it's shot quality. And it's at 2 out of 100. Higher is better, by the way.
Yes.
Higher is better, by the way. And this is the kind of stuff that I talk about with Jagger Firkus when we do our prospect chats, and whenever we look at Jagger Firkus is, he's getting away with playing against teenagers. And he's a lot more skilled than a lot of teenagers. But as you move up the ranks, as you're going to go into the pro game, when things are faster, when there's less time and space, all that kind of stuff, you got to adjust. And you've got to find ways of getting, higher scoring chances, higher percentage chances, better looks for yourself, go to the slot more. Yeah, he just doesn't really play like that. And so that's why I've been talking for a while about why I think he has like a longer runway to the NHL, is because at some point he's going to need to learn to play that way. And we talked about this over the last offseason, right? He very much kind of, made the choice to play the way that he knew he could succeed at junior and try to go out there and win a Memorial Cup with Moose Jaw. And they came really close and all of that good stuff. But it means that he's going to now have to work on that stuff moving forward when he joins the Firebirds next year. And it's going to be interesting to see, RJ, whenever you have a player who's this productive, but then they're going to kind of have to change their game, how that transition goes. And so I'm really kind of intrigued to see what we see from Jagger Firkus next year as he, leaves the WHL behind and he joins the AHL.
Right. I mean, that's the big challenge with Jagger Firkus. He's going to have to change his game. And I understand the decision not to do that yet, because he's had a great career in junior hockey. And I know how much that means to him. I talked to him at Dev Camp last year about what his goals were for kind of the next year. And we talked to a few different players at Dev Camp. And for some of them, you'll hear their goals are, well, I want to get better at this area of my game. I want to kind of improve my skating. I want to make sure I'm more NHL ready, that sort of thing. But for Jagger, it was really, I want to win a Memorial Cup. That was his goal. That was his primary goal for the whole season. And playing the way that he's accustomed to playing in junior, the way that he can get away with playing in junior, was the most effective way of trying to win a Memorial Cup. And I can't blame him for making that call, because that's something that you're going to remember your whole life and always have. And there's always going to be time to try and develop and change your game as well. And you look at, the flip side of it. I mean, heck, look at Shane Wright's last season in junior. That's someone who I think on the other side of it was very focused on trying to make sure that he was trying to be NHL ready, that he was going to have the best pro career he possibly could, and playing in a way that maybe didn't benefit him as much in junior, and his team gets swept in the first round. And that's the kind of thing that can happen. And so how do you as a player, choose to make those changes in your game, and your teammates, your current teammates, often suffer, and your team suffers, right? So I don't blame him one bit for kind of choosing to play that way and pushing off that big change for another year. But it does lead to an issue here with the Kraken, where you kind of have to figure out sooner rather than later how this player projects into your future and in the larger conversation of the offseason. And we know the Kraken need to add talent to the team right now, that can help them this next season. We know that they need to bring in some skilled forwards. And for a player like Jagger Firkus, who clearly isn't ready yet, I mean, he's going to need at least 2 years in the AHL. Like, I think that's probably his timeline. Is that somebody that you might consider selling high on? Because look, you have to give to get. We've talked about this in many episodes in the past, right? When you're looking at prospects, is Jagger Firkus someone you might lean towards even more? Because of this fantastic season he's had in junior, where a team might look at that and think, this guy's going to be a star. If he's available, we'd love to get him in a trade. I don't know. What are you thinking about that, Dylan? Do you would you lean more that way? I know we've kind of hinted at it in the past.
Yeah, I would. I think because the Kraken have done such a good job drafting and developing guys, even though they only have 3 drafts under their belt, they're operating almost from a position of strength. Their prospect pool is rated very, very highly. And I think they are in a spot now where if you're going to bring in at least a younger or in their prime, NHL asset, I think you can go ahead and move one of your top prospects, right? Shane Wright's untouchable, but outside of him, I think everybody should be on the table. And so at that point, you just operate from what the other team wants. And I got to imagine there's some other teams that would be interested in Jagger Firkus based on the production and everything that he had this year and the fact that he just was named CHL Player of the Year and all of that good stuff. I got to think that is attractive. And hey, look, he is a phenomenally skilled player, right? Like his shot is fantastic. His passing ability is highly underrated. That's improved a lot in the last 2 years. I think if he was this good of a passer back in his draft year, he would have for sure been a first round pick instead of falling to the Kraken in the second round. Like there's a lot about his game that has grown and developed in a lot of really good ways. It's just kind of where he sets up in the offensive zone and kind of where he plays in that regard that won't work, really moving forward for him. Certainly not at his size, it won't. And so those are the things that are interesting. And hey, maybe that's, something we're a little bit more critical of just because he's been part of this organization. We've been looking at him more, and maybe another team doesn't know that. And they might just look at the production and look at all the other stuff and the fact that the rest of this player card is him at it, like in 95 plus of just about everything, and they go, that's a good player, we could teach him to stand in the slot, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I'm sure there are definitely some teams out there that see all of the good things because there's a lot of good to see, and maybe would gloss over like, okay, yeah, so the shot position or whatever isn't as great as you'd like, but that's teachable, I think. And again, if you're making a trade, all it takes is one team, right? You don't need the whole league to be totally sold on what he'd become. It's all about just the team that you're potentially trading with, and when we know there are teams that are high on him. I mean, we have heard from places, right, that there's at least one team that certainly would have taken him in the first round had they had a pick in that range, but they ended up not. So, that was a couple of years ago, but I can't imagine that if you're into that type of player, right, I can't imagine his stock would have gone down over the last 2 years. He's done everything that you would want.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So yeah, it's going to be an interesting one. Obviously, it's going to be interesting just to see what Ron does over the offseason in general when it comes to adding talent to the team, whether or not he's going to try to be really aggressive in free agency for the, realistically like 2 guys that might be there, or if he's going to get aggressive on the trade market, and whether or not, that prospect cupboard is going to be opened up in order to make the Kraken better next year. It's going to be interesting, just like it's going to be interesting to see Jagger Firkus moving forward with his professional career as he goes and joins the Firebirds next year, and we'll see if he starts playing this way. It's a bummer, too, because as we could try to kind of transition over into talking about the Firebirds now, one of the big things is as we were at that game and I was really watching the Firebirds offensive system when they have the puck. We've talked a lot about like the 2-1-2 forechecking system and that kind of stuff with Dan Bilesma these last couple of weeks as he was a coaching candidate hire, and then ultimately hired by the Kraken. One of the things that we haven't talked about so much is like their offensive zone system. And it is very much like a kind of crash the net, get 2 guys in and around the goaltender at any given time type system. And that would have been really interesting to see Jagger Firkus play in that next year for the Firebirds. You know what I mean? And see if Dan could have made him a little bit more aggressive about going to the slot, about crashing the net, the way that Dan made Shane more aggressive. Like Shane always had some of that to his game, but he really has taken it to the next level by being given that green light and being really told over and over again, like, no, this is where you should go. And then he was rewarded with a fantastic season with the Firebirds this year and then success at the NHL level doing it. It would have been really, really fascinating to see if Dan could have repeated that with a guy like Jagger Firkus. That would have been a fascinating kind of experiment to watch. Unfortunately, not going to see it now, but that's okay because it means we get Dan.
Well, I mean, hopefully there's some continuity there though in the coaching staff, whether that's Jess Campbell or Stu Bickel, but it's not exactly the same whenever you have somebody new taking over, but hopefully some of the systems stay the same and there's a little bit more to move forward. But I would have loved to see Dan himself get to coach Jagger.
Yeah, well, that and the roster turnover which we'll get to later when we talk about the Firebirds. Yeah. We'll talk about that, and that might dictate a little bit going away from that style of play. We'll see. Where should we start with this? I mean, let's start with the atmosphere, actually. That's what I want to start with. Because all Firebirds games have a wonderful atmosphere when we're out there in Coachella Valley. It's the arena, Acrisure is fantastic. The way it's built is just perfect. There's not a bad seat in the house. Everybody's kind of, right there. It's very intimate. You feel like you're right there with the action. Sightlines are fantastic. The way it's sloped is perfect. Like, all of that stuff is great. And then the fans obviously respond fantastic to all of that. They love having hockey there. They love having a team that they can get behind and root for and be part of their valley. And they just find a way to kick it up a notch, both the team and the fans, for the postseason. RJ, it's so cool to see it, whether it's them with the light up foam sticks like we saw on Friday or any of the other things that they do. I'll let you talk about one of the things that makes the fans great when it comes to them being enthused about play. But it's just really is a great experience. And it's crazy because, like, that arena gets louder than some, like, NHL barns, at least come playoff time. And it's really cool to see that.
Absolutely. Like, I've never seen anything like that at anything that's not the NHL level, right? Where you have fans get that into it. And yeah, I think I know what you were getting at, because the point that I wanted to make too, and it really got driven home to me in this last game, and I love this about the Firebirds crowd, is they cheer as hard, if not harder, like louder, for a defensive stop than they do for a scoring chance or even a goal. Like, the loudest I heard that building get, maybe aside from like a couple of the bigger goals in the game, was when they made a great defensive stop or when Chris Drieger made a big save. Yeah. They love solid defensive hockey. And it's something that I'm not, like, just from going to lots of NHL games in different venues, not a comment on a specific NHL fan base, I'm just not used to that. No. Like, yes, the cheers get big for a big save, but it's not usually the loudest the building gets. And I think that's pretty cool.
I think it's really cool. And it was really fun also for us because, like, where we were seated, we were right behind Drieger for the first and third period. And so, like, it felt like we were very much right on top of that, very, very much the way Drieger was right on top of things, playing that Chris Drieger style, RJ, high in his crease, being aggressive, trying to be in front of the puck like that. It was a lot of fun to watch it from that angle. I got a lot more respect for his game, really, seeing it from that angle. It was pretty interesting. We could talk about that more later. But yeah, we had 3 times he made some, like, good saves or good sequences, and that resulted in the Drieger chance. And that was really fun to see. You always love when a crowd is behind their goaltender, similar to the way obviously the Firebirds crowd was last year with Joey, but the Kraken crowds were with Joey this year, right? And we've heard Joey talk about how great it is to hear that and how much it means to hear a crowd chanting your name, particularly as a goaltender, because let's be real, most of the time as a goaltender, when a crowd's chanting your name, it's the opposing crowd, and it's because you just let a goal in, right? But here you've got people backing you up and supporting you and acknowledging that you did your job, and it's a job that normally only gets acknowledged with a giant red light and a horn blaring because you made a mistake. And here you've got fans acknowledging when you do the little things and you're doing the right thing. And so big props to the Firebirds fans for doing that for their netminders.
Yeah, and I don't think it's a coincidence too, because I like seeing how the roster and the players, I think, have kind of influenced the fans in these formative years of that Firebirds fan base, where you don't get this on most AHL teams, where you have really NHL caliber goaltending for 2 years in a row, and it's different guys too, where you had Joey and then Chris, and Bilesman was even saying after the game, talking about Drieger and how he's played. She's like, he's an NHL goalie. Like, that's the number one thing he had to say about it. Like, he's an NHL goalie. That's what it is. Like, he's NHL caliber. And so I think the fans have gotten that 2 years in a row, and they've massively responded.
Yeah, and that is good to see. Otherwise, I mean, the atmosphere is fantastic. Fuego, one of the best mascots. Forget about what level you're at. Every time I see Fuego and the stuff they do with Fuego, I'm always just, like, in awe of it. It's just fantastic. I had seen him up on the ladder before in person, but being right there next to it as he climbs looked like a 10-foot ladder, straddles it, and then waves a giant flag right over our heads. It was really, really cool.
It was kind of scary being up that close to it, to be honest.
Yeah.
I don't know. I felt like the fear as if it was me up there, because I know I couldn't do that. But yeah, he just like gets all the way up to the top of the ladder, straddles the ladder, and then waves a flag while he's doing that. So no hands on the ladder or anything.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, we talked about the goaltending being NHL caliber. But Fuego's right up there too.
Yes, definitely. So as always, Game Ops team and all of that gets all the love from us. It's always a fantastic experience going out there to the desert to watch some hockey because of all the work they do and all the work that the fans put into it as well. Loved all that. And yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's anything else from a game experience standpoint you want to talk about before we can transition into the hockey side of everything. But I did want to kind of start there because every time I'm out there, I mean, that's always the number one takeaway, because I mean, the Firebirds just kind of always win. So it's like, okay, yeah. But you're always impressed by the fans and the way that the Game Ops team operates.
Yeah, I guess one more thing too. I want to give a shout out to our buddy Jason Hernandez. Always, shows us around and everything. We have a great time seeing him. But he's had some epic calls. He's the Firebirds PA announcer, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
Had some epic calls on the 3 stars lately, and he ramps up like everybody else does come playoff time too. Like if you're watching a Firebirds game on AHL TV, like stick around for the 3 stars calls, because there's some really great stuff there. So I want to give him a shout out, and then also just say to everybody listening, like if you haven't been down there and you're thinking about it, I know it's a whole trip out to Coachella Valley, especially if you're in the Seattle area, but like if you're considering it at all, do it. You will not be disappointed.
Yeah. Or, book something for next year, right? It would be tight to do it this year. But definitely look at doing something. If you're planning a little further out and stuff, I would definitely consider doing that. Be a snowbird, and then go watch the Firebirds. It's fine.
Yep.
It's fine.
It's fine.
So good stuff there. Now on to the hockey, RJ. So the Firebirds are now up 2-0 in the series against the Admirals. Similar situation to last year. We kind of know then what happened. It's the unique setup that the AHL conference finals have, which is 2 games for the higher seeded team, then 3 games now in Milwaukee, and then games 6 and 7 would come back to Coachella Valley if needed. Hopefully they're not needed. They were needed last year. It was, or at least 6 was. Hopefully we don't see something like that again this year. But I don't know. This feels a little different than last year, RJ. It feels like the Firebirds are a little bit more on top of it this year. They kind of know what the Admirals want to do. Admirals have size. They want to use their size. They want to try to get to the inside. And one of the big things that impressed me defensively beyond Chris Drieger was the way the defense just refused to let the big bodies of the Admirals get inside, get to the slot, get in front of Drieger. Drieger never had anybody in front of him that was not a Firebird that entire game. And that is just something you don't see very often, that kind of level of defensive dominance with that kind of collapsing style. It can be hard to pull off. It can go wrong if you don't do it right. But the Firebirds, they just absolutely nailed it.
Right, and Milwaukee is a big team. I feel like you can't fully appreciate that until you're like there during warmups and you just see the size difference, right? And you see some of their big players, right? They are a very big team, and so it's hard to kind of box those guys out net front. But I think the Firebirds, they have the horses to do it. I mean, Vilja Tavainen stood out a bunch to me because he's one of the few guys who really does have that size to match the Admirals forwards, but also guys that maybe aren't as big, but were playing strong in front of the net. Cale Fleury, he's a different player at the AHL level. Like for those who've seen him with the Kraken, and he's done a serviceable job there, but when you put him down in the AHL, I mean, he's one of those guys that's just clear top pairing guy, a true tweener in that sense, yes. Right? Where he feels almost too good for the AHL, but on the lower end of the NHL. And then Riker Evans too, who's at the AHL level, like remarkably physical. He had a couple big hits in this game, and he's not one of the bigger players, but he plays bigger than he is. So impressed by that from the defenseman. And then, the Admirals, they just, I think they lack one or two just kind of higher end skilled guys who can open up space for their bigger players. And that's really the problem. They have like a Joachim Kamel, who I know you're a big fan of, Dylan, but they could really use 2 or 3 more of those guys. And unless they have them, it kind of feels like the Firebirds have their number.
Yeah, the Firebirds don't have to respect anything. right? You can give them perimeter shots, and you don't really have to respect it too much because they just don't have those elite snipers that will really make you pay for doing that, for giving them that time and space. And the Firebirds, I think, correctly recognize that and are playing, appropriately against it. And it's obviously working. You win games 1 and 2, so it's doing well there. I'm glad you mentioned Riker, because watching Riker play, yes, he's not the biggest guy, but he's so strong on his skates. His lower body, just in the way he stands and skates, RJ, right? The way he gets low, the way he bends his knees but keeps his back straight so he's upright. He's keeping plays in front of him. His head is up, but by bending his knees, he can generate a ton of power, and he can then match up physically against these other guys because he can use his lower body and kind of out leverage them. And he also knows, I maybe not be able to win a lower slot or net front battle with somebody, so I'm just not going to let them get there. And that's what I thought was really impressive about Riker Evans for me, was how aggressive he defended situations. He really went out there and challenged the Admirals as they were coming into the zone. He was not afraid to really go up, step up, challenge them with his stick, and then body them up as they came in, right? Go for the poke check, try to disrupt what they're doing stick handling wise. Now they've got to have, really make sure they got 2 hands on their stick. They're focused on the puck. And then the next thing you know, he just gets lower than them and comes up under them, and he's able just to push them off the puck, right? Because they're focused on trying to maintain control of the puck because of his stick. He now can work on the leverage aspect of things. They're not going to be in as good a position for it. And he did that several times, including one situation that was, he was defending a guy coming in all alone. And the way he skated back about a third of the way into the defensive zone, and then he just stepped up into him. He didn't lay out a big hit, but he knocked the puck away. He separated him from the puck, and then another Firebird was able to get there. And I looked at that and I said, this is a guy who is playing at a different level from everybody around him. That's like an NHL play, right? To have that confidence to step up in that situation, because you step up there and he gets around you. He's just got a breakaway on Driegs. And Riker Evans knew that wasn't going to happen. He knew he didn't need to lay a big open ice hit either. He just needed to step up and get between the other guy and the puck, and he did. And that, to me, spoke a lot about Riker Evans' confidence and the way he's playing right now. So I really liked seeing what I saw from Riker Evans. And like I said, if I was to tell anybody to watch for one thing with him, we watch for how he uses his lower body. He'll get a wide stance going into a physical contact with somebody. He's not going to get pushed off of something. He's going to bend those knees. He's going to get lower than them. It was really, really kind of like textbook perfect stuff. If I was coaching again, I would be pointing him out to my players and being like, that's how you play defense, especially if you're going to be undersized against some other forwards. That's the way to do it right there.
Yeah, and confidence is the word. Like there were a couple plays that he made where I even turned to you right then and said, and I don't mean this as like a comment on the Kraken's coaching last year or anything, but I turned to you and I said, it's amazing what he's capable of when he's not worried about being scratched.
Yeah. When he can just go out there and do his thing, he's a different player.
Yeah, and Dan Bilesma absolutely agreed with how well Riker is playing, because we got the chance to ask him a couple questions about Riker, and he said that he thought initially that Riker's game in Ontario was his best of the season, in the playoffs, and then he said then game 1 happened to the Milwaukee series, and I thought that was his best, and then tonight that was definitely his best so far. So it seems like he's just getting better and better, and Dan had a lot of positive words to say about him. I mean, it was kind of similar to how he talked about Ty Karche last year when we went down for the playoffs, and what Karche was doing. Like when the player really stands out there and is NHL caliber, like Dan takes notice.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard not to if you're anybody in the building to take notice. But I do think it's good that Riker is growing with that confidence. He is stepping up in a big way for this postseason run. That's always great to see. And yeah, he's still figuring it out again from coming back. I mean, that was the other thing that Dan kind of talked about, is that transition when you are a player. You asked him the question about Riker was a player who was up at the NHL level, played some big minutes in some big games, and then kind of comes back down to the AHL level. And I thought Dan was pretty open about how difficult that transition can be sometimes, right? Coming back down to the AHL level, and it's a different pace of play. There's a lot of things about it that are different, and it can kind of take a little while, particularly for a defenseman. But Riker's really settled in a huge way right now. Like, he just looks so locked in. He's doing fantastic.
Yeah, he is. And then one more thing on Riker, because I did get the chance to ask kind of a lighter side question, because I know there's some listeners here who enjoy the Garth personality and all that stuff, and remember that at the Kraken exit interviews, Vince Dunn had that quote about saying that Riker, he's an interesting cat. We're still trying to figure him out. And so I told Dan about that quote and asked him if they had figured him out, and if there's anything that Dunner should know to kind of help him there. And, Dan, it took him a sec. I think it caught him off guard a little bit, but he's like, well, I don't know why Dunner would say that. He had the stall next to him, and maybe there's some peculiarities there. But he said with Riker, what you see is what you get. You see the guy in the life preserver, in the swimming pool with wingies on. I can't match the
did it so
the cadence
perfect.
from Dan. I didn't do it justice, but it was just perfect being there in the room. He's fun. We're gonna get some good quotes from him next year.
Yeah, no, for sure. I'm really excited for those press conferences for the Kraken, with Dan on board. So yeah, it's all good stuff. Anything else from the defensive side of things, RJ? You want to talk about? Did you want to talk about Drieger maybe a little bit more before we move on to the forward group?
Yeah, I think he's definitely worth a mention. And unfortunately, we didn't have time to try his sandwich. There's a Drieger sandwich that I know at a local restaurant that he made. But otherwise, as far as his actual play in net, he just looked NHL level, and he's going to get an NHL backup job next year. Yeah. I'm convinced. Like, teams are going to see what he's doing here. They're going to take notice. There were scouts there in the building that I'm sure were watching for that. And I can't wait to see what he can do as an NHL backup next year. And who knows, in the NHL with how goaltending goes, you're a backup to start the year, but opportunities come along. They absolutely come along. So I'm excited for him, just really for next season. I know he still has the rest of this playoff run to go, but like, he just seems locked in. Like, this is the Chris Drieger that we knew from year one with the Kraken, when things were going well, before the injury bug would bite, before he got COVID. Whenever something, whenever he finally got his game together, something derailed it. That wasn't his fault at all. And it looks like what happens when he's actually able to get into a rhythm and get into a groove. This looked familiar to me.
Yeah, it did. And like I said, it was really fascinating being kind of behind the net for it. It was almost exactly the angle that you would play an NHL video game from, where you're kind of like, it's that north-south kind of thing. That's how we were sitting and watching that. Like I said, you had a new appreciation for his style specifically, I feel like, which is very much about, it's a little less maybe athletic, in quotes, I'll say, from what it used to be, where he was a little bit more all over the place with his aggressiveness, right? If you think back to year one with the Kraken, for those of you who remember, and he was, a little like Tim Thomas-ish about the like crazy saves up at the top of the crease and everything. It's a little less about that. It's a little bit more about staying square to the puck, but that aggressive approach, playing up at the top of his crease, keeping the puck in front of him. He was so good at that. And I know that, the Admirals weren't ever really able to get somebody in there to try to bang away at a rebound or something like that. So he didn't always have to worry about that stuff because the D in front of him was playing so well. But I'm telling you, it's been a while since I've seen a goaltender rely on their lower body strength as much as he did to stay in front of pucks, or to, whenever anything would shoot out to the outside, get his leg over there, get his pad over there. But he really did that a lot, and that was really impressive to me, because that's also, like I said, it's a little different than the Driegs I remember, but it looked really, really solid. And I think that that's the kind of stuff that, as you said, the scouts got to be looking at, and we'll see. Now he just needs, though, RJ, he needs to step up. I mean, like, come on. He's the one guy on this team without a point this postseason. What are you doing, Driegs?
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if you could get one before the run was over. I mean, the Firebirds are so good at moving the puck up out of their own zone. They got some fast break type of plays.
Yeah, you know what?
I'll put a quarter in the jar. I almost said Kraken. That happened to me a couple times during the trip.
It does get a little difficult sometimes. The last thing I will say before we move on to the forwards too, and this kind of relates to Drieger, it relates to the defense, was in the third period, Kraken were up, I think 2-0. And then what was interesting was obviously the Admirals were going to try to get going there, right? They need to get going. It's the third period. You're down. Firebirds knew that was going to happen, and so they did something that I thought was really interesting, and I wish that I had the opportunity to ask Dan about it, but it was they started to kind of collapse in defensively. They really went to the slot, and they kind of had this interesting setup where they had the 2 D men back, playing very tight to Driegs, like extremely close to the crease, like almost parallel with Drieger. They would have 2 men back, then they'd have kind of like this weird line with the forwards where they'd almost have them stacked up 1, 2, 3 in a line going vertical down the slot. And I was like, what the heck is this? Like, when do you see that? Like, you don't see that ever, right? Like this kind of weird look setup there. But it was all just about, we're taking away the slot. Nobody's coming to the inside. We're going to force you to take shots from the outside. We're not going to let you get screens for those shots on the outside. Like, they did everything that they could to just put bodies in the slot to keep the Admirals from getting there, and it worked. The Admirals weren't able to get bodies there. And then the other thing that I thought worked really well about it was by having those 3 forwards kind of stacked up the way they did through the slot, one on top of each of another, and with none of them really going out to pressure anybody either, which I thought was interesting. It was a very passive approach. They just took away all the passing lanes. They just sat in every single passing lane that the Admirals wanted that wasn't just a pass back to the point. And it worked great because the Admirals kept trying to force passes across. The Firebirds would just get a body in front of it, almost like a shot block for a pass. But then you had forwards there that were able to instantly just start sprinting up the ice. So Firebirds force a turnover, guy just sends it up the ice, and all of a sudden the Firebirds had multiple 2-on-2s and a 2-on-1 to come after it. And it was like the Firebirds were pretty content just to, hold the Admirals to the outside and then just counterattack from those chances. And I thought it worked extremely well. Like the Admirals never really looked dangerous at that point.
Right, and you could tell they were kind of trying to make the cross ice passes happen. I mean, you look at the one Admirals goal in this game, and it comes off. Yeah. It was off the rush, but it comes off a cross ice pass. And I think if you're looking at ways to potentially beat Drieger, especially with his more aggressive style, look, he's at the top of the crease. If you can get the puck moving from side to side, you can catch him out of position a little bit more than a goalie who's further deeper in his net, right?
Right.
But the Firebirds just wouldn't allow that, and that's perfect synergy between goalie and the 5 skaters that are around him and the strategy that they're playing.
Yeah, it would have been 3-1 at that point, I guess. But it was still like it was a really interesting approach to third period defense, because normally I'm not a fan of being passive. I wouldn't be a fan of maybe zone defense and being passive, like sitting on a 2-goal lead, right? Like that's not a great situation normally. But the way that they did it, and it was so unique and it was so perfect for the opponent that they were playing. I just thought that was really, really interesting, and it was nothing that I'd really seen before. And as we're talking about Dan coming up to coach the Kraken, I just thought it was worth noting that that his team kind of did something like that and had a unique approach to a specific situation against a specific opponent, and that's kind of nice to see.
Yeah, definitely nice to see. Dylan, I did want to ask you about one other area, though, because we talked about it a little bit during the game, but I didn't really check back in with you on it. And that's the power play. Because we know that that's an area where the Kraken struggled this season. They got rid of Paul McFarland, their power play coach. And through 2 games, I know the Firebirds have scored on the power play. They had one on the power play in this last game with Riker Evans. What did you think of kind of the way they were setting up, the puck movement, the player movement, the overall strategy? Because I don't know. There were a couple good moments, but I wasn't impressed on the whole.
Yeah, there was something missing. And I think as I was thinking about it the next day, there was elements of player movement, but usually it was just like if the puck carrier had decided to move to a different spot, that other person would move to take over for where the puck carrier had just vacated. So it wasn't a ton of player movement. I'd obviously like to see more. That's something I'm always talking about for power plays, is I always want a lot, like maximum player movement. The other thing that I found strange about it is this team has made a living, and we'll talk about this, maybe after the power play, of going to the net, right? Crash the net, send bodies to the slot,
Oh, yeah.
low slot, go to net front, goes net side. Just really go after aggressively the other team's net front and just count on the fact that, hey, they're AHL defensemen. They're probably not going to be able to really deal with it all that effectively, and it's really worked for them. The power play doesn't do that. And I thought was really strange to me because like you're winning all these 5-on-5 battles doing that. You've got the man advantage. Now is really the time to get even more aggressive with that. And just because you have literally an extra body out there. And I thought it was kind of odd that the power play didn't really do that. They were a little bit more about cycling it around the outside. I did like that the puck carriers had movement. They would go to different spots. They weren't content just to sit there and then pass it back to somebody. That was good because otherwise, frankly, it would have looked pretty close to a Kraken power play. if that had been the case, at least the puck carriers felt like they could move around, try to get a shooting lane. But I think I was a little disappointed in it. I would have liked to have seen a little bit more, especially because it just didn't feel like it fit with the identity that the team otherwise has. And that was the big thing that I kind of found odd about it.
Right. And also, if you look at the power play goal they did score, and I think it was kind of an outlier as far as the way the play was set up and everything. That was the one time you did have somebody net front.
Yeah.
You had Max McCormick standing right in front of Troy Grosnick, even arguably knocked his stick out of his hand. I know Grosnick was saying that he did, but that's the kind of stuff you want to do. And really, that was the only time we saw it. And it resulted in a goal, but it was the only time we saw it.
Yeah. So that is the one thing that I would say about their power play is that it needs to have more stuff net front. I mean, there wasn't really even screens. Like how are you not screening more?
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, like I've watched the tape back over because I was taking video of the power plays. Not a whole lot of screening going on, but that one moment where you had McCormick in front, and it was a perfect screen because Grosnick had to kind of look around him. It worked. It was effective. Yeah.
So, and that's the one time you can get away with the screen because they're going to let you, right? It's a power play. They're going to let your
have
guy
an extra
there.
skater. They can't take away everyone. Yeah.
Yeah. So, that was a little bit of something. And, certainly if they're going to have to go on and say face Hershey again in a final, you're going to want to have that kind of figured out. Because like special teams will become very important in a situation like that. So that was my thought on the power play. I'm kind of with you. I was a little disappointed is a word, but a little surprised, I guess, that it wasn't more aggressive given how aggressive the team is at 5-on-5.
Yeah, I guess that's the point I was trying to make. Well said.
Yeah. And I mean, speaking of being aggressive at 5-on-5, boy, like I've said it multiple times now, but this team loves to crash the net, RJ. They love to get net front, and it just works with the personnel they have too, right? Like some of these forwards, we've talked about like Shane Wright and how great and how much he's excelled. Again, unfortunately, did not play in that game. No real update on him, but he's missed now 3 games. Including both games for this Western Conference final. Hopefully we see him again soon. But just looking at some of the other guys on this team, and especially the ones that are really playing well right now come postseason time, right? And you look at like game 1 of this series, John Hayden, right? And what he was able to do in that one. You look at this game that we were just at, and it was like Cole Lind and Podorowski, right? And Podorowski like being a guy who's really good at being able to get pucks down there. Right, make passes to the net front, make passes to the lower slot, really set players up there. It's been pretty interesting because obviously I went to a couple regular season games. They were aggressive about doing this, but there were still plenty of times where it was Cameron Hughes flying around and Logan Morrison flying around, and it was them attacking in transition, and they were able to get a lot of scoring that way. And now that it's playoff time and things are a little bit slowed down, more physical, nitty gritty, you're seeing these other guys step up that can play a more net front, low slot style of game, and they're really excelling at it, and it's really giving other teams fits because, like I said, they're AHL defensemen, right? Like you could say like AHL pairing 1 defensemen are still like very, very legit players. They might be, borderline NHL players, all that stuff like we talked about. But when you start attacking like that against second, third pairing AHL defensemen, you can make some stuff happen there. And I think the Firebirds know that, and they're really taking advantage of it.
Right. And you said giving other teams fits. I think that's definitely true. I mean, you look at Troy Grosnick, he was upset.
He was
halfway through that game after the Riker Evans goal. He kind of felt he got bumped in the crease. It wasn't the first time. And I mean, yeah, he was angry. He was yelling at the refs. He was talking to the officials the whole rest of that game.
Yeah.
A lot. Whenever there was another stoppage or a TV timeout, he went straight to the ref and was talking about it. And that's exactly what you want in a playoff series. You want the opposing goalie upset, complaining, maybe not in the right headspace for that whole game. That's exactly what you want. And the Firebirds have played some pretty good goalies in the playoffs so far. I mean, in this past round, you had Eric Portillo for the Ontario Reign. And I mean, he's a really good goalie, one of the top college guys that came over, a big guy, but going to the net, I mean, you see it in the goals that they scored in that series, just completely took him out of the series because a lot of goals he just didn't have a chance on because he was screened, because there was a tip, because it was just jammed in from 2 feet in front of him. There were so many of those, and it's just a nightmare as a goalie because you always want to feel like you have a chance to stop shots. You want them on the perimeter. You want your reflexes. You want everything that to make the difference, right?
Right.
But the way the Firebirds play, there's just not much as a goalie you can do on some of those plays, and it's just frustrating. It just adds up.
It is. I mean, all you can do is try to stay square to it. But otherwise, every other tool in your tool bag as a goaltender is gone, right? You're not talking about really line of sight being a big deal because you're either screened and you're not getting a great, view of it, or it's happening right in front of you or right to your side where it doesn't really matter that you can see it. It's so close. You're just having to make a reaction, save at that point, if you even can. So the Firebirds are just so good at taking that stuff away. And that's a lot of the stuff that, we had talked about the Kraken needing last year at the NHL level. And this is how you manufacture goals, right? If you don't have necessarily the ability to attack in transition consistently or to, just snipe one from the perimeter or anything like that, this is stuff. Like if you throw pucks on net, you get passes down into the low slot and you've got two guys there, you're going to create a lot of chaos for the other team. They're not going to be able to set up their transitional attack the other way because now they've got to keep bodies back, right? Like that's a big problem. You saw the Admirals had no ability to generate anything through transition because they had to keep so many people back. That's something that happens at the NHL level too. So that's a big benefit to it. A lot of times your forwards will be able to get kind of an inside edge on the defenseman in and around the crease there, right? They might not be able to win that muscle battle, but for that first reaction or first go at the puck, they're going to have the inside edge because defensemen and forwards in those situations generally facing two opposite directions, right? Defensemen have to keep their eyes out, their back to their goaltender before the puck comes in. Forwards don't have to, right? And so you always have that kind of mismatch on that first initial chance that favors the offense. And I feel like these are a lot of the things that we talked about that the Kraken needed to start doing late in the season just to even prove that they could, and they didn't. And then you look at this Firebirds team and it's just oh yeah, we're just going to do that. And we're just going to ride it to a 2-0 lead in the Western Conference final and look like this isn't hard. It's crazy.
And I'm hoping you get that same kind of buy-in from the Kraken next year, and they keep trying to play that way because that's a lot of what they were missing last year. And I mean, heck, if you're Ron Francis, because he watches Firebirds games, and well before this playoff run, if you're watching that and you're thinking about, okay, who's my next coach going to be? What kind of things do we need to change? I mean, how do you see that and not think, yeah, this is what we need to bring?
Right. In addition to all the other culture aspects that Dan brings in that we talked about last week. So yeah, it was a good one. I think certainly if you're a Kraken fan and you're watching the way the Firebirds are playing right now, you've got to be really, really excited about things just because it's a lot more aggressive in a lot of ways. It's maybe a little bit more passive in the defensive zone, but certainly when we're talking about the offensive zone, whether they have the puck already or whether or not it's their forechecking, it's a lot more aggressive, a lot more stuff's going on and happening. And I think for anybody that was a Kraken fan last year, you just hear that in the offensive zone, you'll take it.
Yeah, definitely. Now, Dylan, is it time? Can we talk about the fun off-ice narrative here, the drama?
I think so.
Okay. All right. It's time. So we got lucky that we went for this game where there's a little bit of drama brewing between the two teams because before game 2, one of the Admirals players, Spencer Stastny, was doing his pregame media, and he said that the word around the league is that the Firebirds were born with a silver spoon in their mouth. Of course, implying that they're kind of spoiled. They are a new team. They've got new facilities. I mean, yeah, it's great there. They've got awesome weather. Like it's great. But that comment, I think, may have rubbed some of the Firebirds players and staff the wrong way. Of course, implying that they're spoiled a bit. And so after their game 2 win, the Firebirds players, and it was Cole Lind, Andrew Podorowski, and Riker Evans, came out there for the post-game media, and they brought a big old silver serving spoon with them, and they just put it down right in front of them. And then they did the post-game media with that right there. And then finally, by the end of the media, it was noticed a little bit. And as they were walking away, asked, "Is that a silver spoon by chance?" And Cole said, "Might be." So I thought that was pretty fun. We definitely got did a lot of numbers on social media there.
Mm-hmm.
And lots of people saying they aspire to be that level of petty. And yeah, I think it's a great, awesome response. They didn't say anything about it, but just having that there as a little response, I thought was cool. Even the Milwaukee Admirals had to admit it,
yes,
as they responded to our tweet just saying, "This was good. We've got nothing else to say other than this was good." And then the handshake. So I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, the handshake with the reel, which I thought was great, right?
Yeah.
Real recognized reel, and it's like,
Yeah.
okay, the Admirals recognizing us as us and the Firebirds as real. Yeah, it was phenomenal. I loved it. It was so exciting to be there for it too, as it just kind of like happened and unfolded in front of us. It was really, really fun. It was a lot, because it's been a while since we've had anything like that, and at the NHL level, maybe you don't always get some stuff like that either, especially only 2 games into a series. So to have something like that, I thought was pretty good, and it shows how much fun this team is having too. Right, that they're feeling confident for one, yes, but also that they're having fun, and they're keeping perspective on everything as well, that they could go out there and think about something like that and go ahead and do it. It was really, really fun to see that, for sure.
Yeah, it's a sign of a successful team too, just being able to keep it loose like that and just having fun with it, and that's exactly what they're doing. So that's pretty fun too. We'll see, if any of that talk escalates or whatever as throughout the rest of the series. But that was just a fun moment to kind of close the night out with.
Yeah, so I'm excited to see what the Firebirds have the rest of the way here, RJ. Game 3 is tomorrow, June 4th at 7 Central Time. So there'll be 5 out here on the West Coast for us. So excited to see that one and how the Firebirds do as the series transitions to Milwaukee, and then where things could go from there.
Yep, excited to keep an eye on the Firebirds. I mean, if you're not already watching the games, AHL TV, I think the playoff package, it's like what, $25, something like that.
Yeah, it's not very much.
Yeah, but so you get all the playoff games with that, and I just follow the Firebirds. They are a fun team. You will not regret it. It's a great time.
Definitely. So that's I think gonna do it for the podcast. Again, everybody, we're a little past brunch time now, RJ. But want to remind everybody that at that Moss Bay Hall location, for Queen Anne Beer Hall, they have that wonderful brunch menu that I'm looking forward to checking out next year, as I'm going to be in Seattle a lot more than I am now. And then, so yeah, that's exciting stuff. Thanks to them for sponsoring this. And then, yeah, and thanks to the Firebirds for the incredible atmosphere and the incredible game. It was all good stuff.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I don't know what you're doing. All right, everybody. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you all next time.
Hey everyone, before we go, we just wanted to give a quick shout out to all of our awesome patrons over at patreon.com/Emerald City Hockey, especially our Terror of the Deep patrons. Thank you so much for making all this possible. We really appreciate your support.